Swinging back to Wilt. Wilt inside. Hop step, kick out to Scheidt. Scheidt, corner, Knotts, 3-ball. Got it! We're all tied up! 64-64. 1:12 left to play.
He's going to have to chuck up a shot soon, too, on the shot clock. Ball is around. There's Jake Scheidt. And here comes Jake Scheidt and Baker. Scheidt, the long to Baker, slaps it home! Anton Baker!
Welcome back to Jacket Sports Weekly. Another week has gone by of sports, and that means another episode of JSW here. It's been a pretty slow week getting back into things after spring break with sports, but the baseball team has performed. They had a doubleheader against Penn State Altoona. They lost 0-5 in the first game, and then 3-5 in the second game. And Nick, what did you see in this game against Penn State Altoona?
Yeah, Jesse, I saw a lack of pitching. That's what I saw. And we also just really couldn't get the ball on the bat. We couldn't hit the ball. We couldn't get on base really. But you're the numbers guy, so I'm going to hand it over to you. So just give us some stats on what you got.
Following the team through Florida, I was really surprised with this performance they had. Gavin Pratt pitched the over 3 innings. He gave up 4 hits, 1 earned run, and 4 walks. And listen to the word walks because it's very consistent throughout this doubleheader. Dalton Lucy had just over an inning pitch, 2 hits, 3 earned runs, 3 walks. This is all in the first game. And then freshman Zach Scabelli came in, pitched 2 innings, no hits, no earned runs, and a strikeout. So there are still some highlights to that. The second game, we did score 3 runs, but I mean, when you're losing games 3-5, and one of the highlights of your team is pitching, it's pretty troublesome when you can't connect with the bat. Earhart, the freshman, he pitched that game 6 innings, gave up 6 hits, 5 earned runs, and 4 walks. And so walks have been a big theme for this team, something I didn't really quite see in Florida. And they had a game against Pitt Bradford postponed. That was Friday. They're playing today, and then they've got other doubleheaders coming up soon. So what can this team do to get on a roll?
Yeah, I'm just going to have to root it back to get that pitching settled because you can't have all these walks in a game. You also can't give up that many runs. Like you said, when you're losing 0-5 and 3-5, yes, they're not bad scores, but when you're walking all those batters, that's one of the reasons why they're getting all these runs. And so, Jesse, I just want to ask you, like you said, you and Joe followed the baseball team down to Florida. The team went 3-3. Now they're not doing so hot. Do you think there's something, like, personally, what do you think that they can do?
I think they can have a phenomenal year. We've seen it. I mean, Joe and I saw it in Florida. If you were part of that coverage and watched, you also saw it. They had a lot of high points with these newer players, and I think it might have just been coming back home and playing back at home on their first game back from spring break, but we didn't see the consistency that we saw from players like Gavin Pratt. I mean, Gavin Pratt's batting above 500. He just couldn't get on base in the second game. He pitched phenomenal some games during the Florida trip, but now we're seeing, the lack of consistency, and it's not just Gavin Pratt. I mean, it's other players on the team as well, and they're just new faces at Waynesburg University, and I think they can perform great. But something else that we're not seeing for the team overall hitting, they're currently hitting .277 as a team, but they're not as patient, and that's something I really, pinpointed on the Florida trip was how patient they were. But we're not seeing a lot of walks. We're seeing a few strikeouts from these teams, and especially the experienced players. So they just need to get in a rhythm and get things going as well.
Absolutely. So moving on to softball. We're going to talk to Seth here in a little bit about that. Went 6-2 over in Myrtle. We have Autumn Blair now as one of our main pitchers. Her and Sydney Wilson did fantastic over the trip. So talk a little bit about, softball and what do you expect from them?
Well, they're in a tricky spot right now because they're 6-2. They did great over the whole trip, spring break to Myrtle. But they had a little off period here, and I think that could be worrisome, if you're worried at all about the softball team, it would be just the break of going on a roll and then having this pause, this respite before getting back into things. But I think once you add Autumn into the bullpen for this Waynesburg softball team, I mean, they've got the chance of repeating and going back-to-back. We saw Sydney Wilson, such a phenomenal player and pitcher at the entire Division III level of the NCAA, and I mean, she's returning, still putting up her numbers, but now you've got someone that can give her a break, and
Exactly.
Autumn is exactly that person they needed to up things. I'm really excited how the rest of the season goes as they face off against La Roche Wednesday and then John Carroll Thursday, and then they get PAC play. They go on the road 2 till 1 p.m. Saturday and get into the feel of the PAC, and I mean the conference games that really matter when it comes to championships.
Absolutely. You know, speaking about just one last thing about softball, the team is really young. We didn't really lose that many seniors last year, and so now we just have a whole bunch of new faces coming in. So do you think that this will make the team, do you think that it'll falter because they're all new people playing with, you know, an all different game now that you're in college? Or do you think that, you know, like you said, they'll just go back to back and have no issues?
I mean, it's hard to predict back to back, but I think they're on the best path for that. And I mean, once you got players like Sydney Wilson, that's a cornerstone to your team, and you just build off that. You see that in all levels of sports. You just build off that cornerstone, and I mean, that's essentially why teams tank. And believe it or not, if you consider it Waynesburg softball tanking to get Sydney Wilson and then becoming PAC champs, it's well worth it. But going to track side, track side of things, they're in a transition from indoor to outdoor with the spring season coming on us. And the first meet they had was in Morgantown for the Stan Ruminski Open. It was only an individual meet. We'll have Meg Berry on later to discuss it, but we're seeing these new athletes performing and being able to participate in the spring season. What do you think that's going to add to contribute to this track team?
Well, I will say that, you know, switching from indoor to outdoors is tough. You know, we're at a spot right now in PA weather where it's still cold and still windy, so it can mess up, you know, the way you throw, the way you run. And, you know, Meg's going to talk about that here in a little bit, but, you know, just looking at some of the stats, you know, from this past week, Isaac Huey placing sixth in javelin. John Stewart, who was a freshman here at Waynesburg University, he, you know, hit first in his flight for discus, but he also placed 13th. And as a freshman, putting up those types of stats, you know, that's huge. And then switching over to the women's side, obviously, you know, Meg Berry, she's, you know, doing so good right now in track and field. She placed 4th in javelin. Becca Dolce placing 9th in shot put, and then Reagan Pettis and Grace Tanksley, if I said her last name right, placing 5th and 6th in the long distance run. You know, this track team looks great. You know, this was their first meet outside. I honestly think that they're gonna do a lot better as the weather gets progressively better.
I agree with you, and even though things got off to, you know, kind of a trip starting the 4x1 with Zach Broad, he's fellow communication major, I think there's only upsides to this team, and something that the track team has really done is bring excitement to their sport. And you've mentioned, you know, Isaac Huey, John Stewart, they're football players. You got Ty, who's a basketball player. Yeah. And they're young, but they're excited to perform in a team that does well. And I mean, the other sports are also coming up and performing well as well. I think a lot of change is happening in Waynesburg athletics, but the track team is kind of spearheading that, and they're really getting things going, and there's that excitement about this, and I'm just so excited about what the spring season can mean, and hopefully we get warmer weather as things warm up for this spring season.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you one last thing here, Jesse. You know, like you said, the weather's getting better. You know, when we were freshmen here at Waynesburg, the track and field team were winning packs left and right. You know, do you think we can see one before we part out of Waynesburg?
I think at some level we definitely can. And when you got athletes like Kat Henderson, excuse me, it's just going to be phenomenal overall athlete and performer for the track team. And I think, you know, with the addition of Meg Berry and everything that surrounds and supports her, we're going to see great things from the track team. I'm really excited. I love seeing teams succeed and do well, and I think track is definitely on the right movement. But we'll be right back after this, and we'll start things off with softball and Seth Adams. You're watching JSW.
Welcome back to Jacket Sports Weekly. With us here, we have Seth Adams. Seth, you're here talking with us about softball. So the women's team, they just came back from Myrtle Beach. Can you talk a little bit about the trip and how they did?
They did pretty good over this Myrtle Beach trip. They went 6-2 overall. They played very well, played very good softball, putting up tons of runs and not allowing a lot of runs. In the games that they did lose, they weren't really close games, but they overall did very well. I mean, they haven't played since then, but it's looking promising that these next couple of games they are going to play at home, which is Wednesday and Thursday, are going to look very promising for the softball team.
Yeah, a lot of great things over the trip to Myrtle Beach. And I mean, a lot of stuff we expected from the softball team, a phenomenal job they did. And we have all talked a lot about Sydney Wilson, one of the greatest pitchers in softball at the Division III level. But we've also got a new name that we added to the list, and the pitching is definitely a high point to that. Seth, if you'd like to talk a little bit about Autumn and what she did during the trip in Myrtle.
Yeah, she did great. Like all pitchers honestly did great. They let up little hits, little amounts of hits, and like I said earlier, they let up only a little bit of runs. So they've really been stepping up their game, showing that, hey, we're coming here to win. We're going to show you what's up, and we're going to outpitch you. And they did that a lot. They only let up like one run in a couple of games, let up zero, let up some shutouts. They did lose a couple, but I mean, they still put up a great performance, allowing to show who's boss and show what's up and what Waynesburg's all about.
So Seth, we mentioned that the team hasn't played since they got back from Myrtle. So do you think that these games coming up against LaRoche, against John Carroll, do you think that they're going to have a tough time since they're still a little bit cold coming off that trip, or what do you think?
Well, I think since they did so well in Myrtle Beach after having that long stretch of no softball over the offseason, I think they're going to do very well because LaRoche struggled a little bit. They went to Florida. They went 1-6. They didn't have the best performance. They got beat by a couple of times. So I feel like this is a great way to start the season at home against LaRoche, doubleheader on Wednesday. Show them what's up. Say, hey, we're going to beat you pretty good, and then just keep going in forward. I feel like it's a great team to start against because they're going to show them up and be able to have that momentum going through the season and start it off strong.
So softball had a great trip to Myrtle Beach, 6-2 overall. That's their overall record. Their first game is home Wednesday against LaRoche at 3 p.m. And we've talked a lot about the positives. Even Mercer ruled some teams at Myrtle Beach. But if we need to critique something about the team or even just something they can improve on for the rest of the season, what would that be, Seth?
So they have a lot of games where they didn't score. Like they played Gettysburg, they didn't score any runs at all. They lost 4-0. It wasn't one of their best games, but it's just like staying focused, I feel like, being able to realize what's going on, being able to be like, okay, this team, they're pretty good too. We're one of those top contenders, but we need to be able to compete against those other top contenders and be able to show them that they're up there too. I mean, sure, they just need to get the bats going a little bit, but I mean, they still have they have a lot of people batting over 400 or above 500 even, which is incredible, but there's still some games where they're a little lackluster at times. But I feel like if they get the consistency going, they'll be good.
So, Seth, Waynesburg softball, reigning PAC champs from last year. This team is still very young. Do you think that if you had to give us a prediction, what do you think their final record would be, or how do you see them going into the playoffs?
They're going to be great, I feel like, again, especially starting off this well again. I feel like with this young team, they're going to be able to go out there and do the same thing again this year, be at the top, competing for the top in the PAC, and just keep that momentum from last year even, with already starting 6-2, having a promising game on Wednesday, and playing another one the day after to really get started. I feel like they're going to be great this year again and have another outstanding year.
So would you be willing to say, dare we say, a repeat, back-to-back PAC champs? I'm kind of with you here, Seth. I think it's very possible. You factor in these younger first-year players that are still contributing greatly, and now you've got sophomore Sydney Wilson. I mean, she's got a whole year of experience under her belt, and I mean, the phenomenal year she had as her first-year freshman last year. I definitely think it's really doable. But I'd just like to hear you say what you think, Seth.
It's only going up from here. I mean, we're here already. We're just going to go even higher. That's what I'm thinking. This team, they got it together now. As freshmen, they were doing that last year, that well of pitching last year. Come on now. You're only going to get better from there. So I feel like you're just going to keep improving. You're going to have all these teams. The team chemistry is going to build. The softball team is coming off of a great year last year. Like, hey, let's do it again. Why not? And just win another PAC. I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to have a repeat, gentlemen.
So would you say, as regular season's going to start, day one starter, who do you got?
That's gonna be
as
tough, man.
pitcher.
That's a tough one. You know what? Get him to Autumn, man. I feel like she is gonna be able to set the tone, show what she's got, and just be able to, as a freshman, be able to go and be like, hey, let's do this. You know, I got this too. We got 2 pitchers who are dominant, but hey, well, let's see what the new one got and show and let everyone know, hey, we got 2 now. So
absolutely, Seth. High hopes here for the Waynesburg softball team, hoping to repeat a PAC championship. Well, thank you, Seth, for talking with us about softball. When we come back, we're going to talk to Meg Berry about track and field. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Jacket Sports Weekly.
Welcome back to JSW. Seasons are changing and we're moving from indoor to outdoor as we cover the track at Waynesburg University. And alongside with us is our analyst, Meg Berry. Meg, the first outdoor track event, spring season's kicking off, especially after spring break. You just want to tell us a little bit about how the team performed in Morgantown?
Well, I can't really call it a spring meet because it did snow for most of it, and it was 30 degrees and extremely windy and very, very cold. I actually came back with some wind burns, so it wasn't very spring weathery, but it was the first spring meet of the outdoor season, and it actually went very well for both the men's and women's, but unfortunately with the weather, it was more field heavy when it comes to like top competitors and places and things of that nature, just because the conditions were not that good on the track. But for the men's, there was Isaac Huey got 6th place in the javelin. John Stewart got 1st place in his flight for discus and 13th overall. Adam Helbling 12th in long jump. Andrew Casper 10th in the 5K. Matt Shank 3rd in the 1500 steeplechase. Isaiah Matthews 11th in the 100-meter dash and 10th in the 200-meter dash. And I know those places for Isaiah Matthews, those are unusual. You never really see Isaiah placing that low. But like I said, the conditions were really bad. They were running into extremely hard winds going down that 100 stretch. But then on the women's side, myself, I got 4th place in javelin. Rebecca Dolce got 9th in shot put. And Reagan Pettis and Grace Tensky both placed 5th and 6th in the 1500-meter run. So, yeah.
So, Meg, I just want to ask you something real quick because you mentioned John Stewart here. And we talked before the show started. He's a freshman, correct? Mm-hmm. So can you just talk a little bit about how you feel about John coming right out of high school, placing 13th, like you said, and 1st in his flight for discus. So how do you feel overall about that?
John really had a really good performance this weekend. He was nervous going into the meet just because he's still in spring football as well on top of that. So going from spring ball practices to track practices, it's a lot. It's a little overwhelming. But he was nervous going into the meet for sure. But he really had a really good performance. But he adjusted very well. For those of you who don't know, the discus size changes for men's coming out of high school into college. It gets a little heavier and the circumference gets bigger. So it's harder to throw when you're transitioning from high school into college. But he picked that up really fast. And to get 13th overall, he wasn't happy with his distance, but he actually shocked himself because he thought it was a lot less than it was. So he is proud that he started where he is, but I definitely think this will be a good push forward for him to do great in the rest of the season.
Talking about John, he's one of the many athletes that have moved and able to participate now in the spring season. I know John and another of those athletes is Ty as well. Mm-hmm. Could you just talk about the impact they had in this past meet? And then also while you're on that, because it was only individually ranked, so it wasn't an overall team effort. Could you just play into that about how the team ranking will be affected by these individual athletes now participating?
Of course. So like you said, like with John and like Tyreek Williams, Ty being able to come and compete as well. They're huge assets to the team. Tyreek Williams, on his first week here, they decided that he was going to be on the men's 4x1 team. He's fast. He's really fast. He competed extremely well this weekend, especially after having like a rough 4x1. I'm sure most of you have seen that Zach Barat, he really Superman. He put his life and his body on the line to get the first handoff to Kai Herbert, and it was just kind of rough. Like I said, with the weather, it being the first meet of the year, it was hard to get that transition. But like you said, these individual performances really add up when it comes to packs. So basically what this part of the season is about, it's about getting the reps in and feeling that competition mode. So by the time that we do get to packs, and it does matter for the whole team, we're all competing at the best of our abilities just to get the best team effort and to place the best we can as a team.
So you talked a little bit about individually. I just want to switch over to the women's side. Meg, you placed 4th in javelin. That's to me, that's fantastic. Do you think that you have more to prove, or do you think that, I mean, obviously you have something to prove. You're great. I've seen some of the meets before. Like, you're great. Do you think that you have more to prove in the coming season for packs?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I have much more room to grow here this season. Last season I opened up with around a 30-meter throw. This season I opened up with a 34-meter throw. So just at the start of the year already, I'm 4 meters ahead of where I was last year. And that was honestly my goal. Like, it's everyone's goal to go in and have the best meet that they've ever had and PR every single meet. That's every athlete's goal. But sometimes it's just not realistic. You have to do the best that you can with the weather, the conditions of the meet, and the officials. Sometimes they're a little irritating, so you just kind of have to work with what you got, in all honesty.
Now the next meet for the track team is Saturday against Bethany. That's a PAC team, and there will be a lot of PAC athletes there as well. Could you just give me an expectation with these new Waynesburg athletes that are participating now, and you're facing off against some familiar faces in the PAC, just a goal or vision that this team's looking for the spring season?
I definitely think now that we have one meet under our belt, it is important that we start getting some more PRs this weekend. And especially, like you said, Jesse, since it's against a lot of PAC teams, to really put ourselves out there. And I think what is going to be important for us is to go into every meet remembering that we're competing against ourselves to do better than we did last week, or to do better than we did the last time we ran, and things of that nature. But on top of that, we need to look at each and every one of these meets as we're only competing against the PAC teams. Because this weekend, there was only 2 PAC teams at the WVU meet. That was Allegheny and Bethany. So it was really easy to section those people off and just only picture yourself competing against them. But at the same time, we competed against Akron, which is a D1 school, and we were able to keep up with some of those people. So just to have that mindset of to just go into a meet and do better than you did the last time you competed is, I think, what's going to carry this team this year.
So Meg, as we get into further into the season, as the weather gets better, because obviously, like you said, the weather was not good at this last meet. You guys placed great. Do you think you guys can do better than you did this past meet?
Oh, yes, for sure. Weather has a huge factor in the outdoor season and with everything. So wind is a big aspect on every single one of the events, headwind and tailwind. So like I said, for Isaiah Matthews, it was hard for him this weekend because on his 100 meters straightaway, he was running directly into really strong wind. So right there, that just pushes you back and it slows you down. It doesn't think that it would, but sometimes that it does. And then there's things like tailwind that could help jumpers and throwers, and it could help push you through the air or cushion your throw after you throw. But that's just some of the minor things that go into it that you don't think about for indoor season, because it's a controlled environment and it's a regular temperature and things of that nature. But based off last year, when the temperature was warmer and the sun was out, we competed much better than we do when it's snowing and 30
cold,
degrees.
Yeah.
So wishing for warmer weather this season as we transition into the spring. That has been all for Jacket Sports Weekly, but see you next week for another episode of JSW.
This has been a production of Waynesburg Community